Hey everyone, it's Jay Wolf here again. Today's going to be a little lengthier video, and this is going to be just part one of, I'm hoping to get it in two, maybe three parts. But what I'm going to do here is a guide on how to build your own desktop PC. It's a really easy process. It's actually a pretty fun process, and everything that you see here I've purchased new or I actually already have, so this is stuff that I actually had to buy myself, but I really enjoy building desktop PCs. It's something that I really got into about 6 months, a year ago. It's a I don't know if I'd call it a hobby, but it's definitely something that I enjoy. So as you can see here, we have most of our components here. This is the part one where I'm going to go over everything and why I chose what I chose. And then we'll jump in and then we'll go into part two, which will be on how to actually assemble and build the PC. And then depending on the length, I might do a part three on just how to install Windows, the drivers, miscellaneous items, things like that. That's a pretty easy process, so I might not actually do that depending on how much time I have. But so now let's jump in and see what we actually got here and what we're going to need. The first thing that I want to go over is I'm going to go over just a general view of everything I got here. First thing is coffee. That's probably the number one thing, which you do not want to keep near any electronics. So now for all the components I chose, the first one that we're going to see here is the Cooler Master Half X Full Desktop Tower. This is the blue edition. This is actually the only thing in here that I've actually used that and the water cooler, but I've actually used this a decent amount. This is my old desktop tower. It's in like new condition. It's a great system, especially if you're using airflow as your cooling method. So we'll jump into why I chose that before. Motherboard, we have the Z68X UD3HB3 motherboard, brand new. And then for the CPU, I actually chose the Core i7 2500K processor. I'm personally using this in my desktop right now, and I've had no issues. I do a lot of video and photo editing, and it's very overclockable, especially if you're using a water cooler, which we're going to have. I'll show that in a second. And then for our memory, what we're going to use is Kingston 1600, 8 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. I'm using this also currently, and I haven't had any issues with it. Performs great. And for our cooler, let me step over here. Sorry, this is actually from my previous system. I actually upgraded, but I am going to use the Corsair H70 cooler for the CPU. And I'm going to use a push-pull configuration. It's a great cooler. It provides ample cooling for this, but my new case has a different cooler setup where I'm doing the radiator at the top. So this is going to be our cooler. And now we'll get to probably the best part of the system besides the case, and that is the XFX Radeon HD 7950 GPU. Now you don't necessarily need to put a GPU if your motherboard has one already built in, but since 99% of people that are going to watch this or be interested are going to be interested in gaming, this is an excellent card. And with the power supply at 700 watts, it's plenty to power it. Actually, I could probably jump in and do two of these. The storage, which is already installed. This is the LG DVD CD writer burner. It's great. I'm currently using that in my older system, and it's performed excellent. Operating system boot drive, we're going to use the Samsung 64 gigabyte SSD. Excellent, reliable drive. Haven't had any. I have two of these right now. Besides Intel's 520 series, this is probably the second best. I've had no issues with any of my drives. And I don't have it with me, but I actually have a 500 gigabyte Seagate hard drive that I'm actually going to be using in here. And then we have a copy of Windows 7 Home, which every computer needs. Some people don't put this along with their actual builds, but you're going to need this if you're building your own computer. And I think that's basically it. I chose not to do a card reader in this right now, but they're really easy to install, simple process. And some of the tools we're going to need, pad, piece of paper, always have something like that handy, a pen, just if you need to write anything down. I have a couple screwdrivers here. Really, you could probably do everything with the screwdrivers and some tie downs. So, but I like a smaller one, and then I have a regular large magnetic one. Gonna need some pliers here to clip the ties, and I always like scissors. Never know when they might come in handy. So that's basically it for this is everything you need. This should be a great system to build. And now let me jump in and show you each individual and why I chose each part of the system here. Some of them actually I already had, but the majority of this stuff is brand new. So we're going to jump in and show you why I chose all this to perform a system build on. The thing I like to go over here is the case, because this is actually where you're going to take all your components and put them in. One thing I would mention, this is the 4th or 5th case I've actually purchased, is spend the extra 50, 70, 80 bucks and get a very nice case. This is basically what people are going to see when they come in, especially if you're into any type of visuals and how you like the system to look. This is a full desktop tower, so it is a little bigger. They have some nice half ones if you want to go with the, I believe it's the 600D by Corsair. That's a really great system, but you got to think of what's going to actually fit for you and what's going to work best for you. And just to kind of go over this a little bit, this is Cooler Masters, one of their half series, their half X, and it is made for airflow cooling. You can use liquid if you want. It's not as big in the inside as, say, a Corsair 800D, but it has I believe this is 200. It has 200 millimeter fans. And it's going to have 120 in the rear here, so that's a lot of fan support to help cool all the processors here on the inside with the GPU and CPU, everything that gets warm. And another thing is, how many expansion slots do you need? This one has 4. And then it's got hot swap bays for your hard drives. If you need to have quick access to your hard drives, you can just hot swap them out, put them right in there. And go to the side. Another thing you want to look for is the side of your case. What you actually want to, some people just like it to be all black so you can't see the internals, but if you're putting a nice gaming system together, this one has a nice clear panel so you can see some of the internals, and then you got a fan here to help cool it. One important thing to note is how much storage and actually how much space you're going to need. Like I said, this one can support 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hard drives or SSDs, which is a decent amount of storage for a desktop PC. And another thing to point out is, as you can see, there's already standoffs in here. You might not be able to see because it's not zoomed in, but you need to pay attention to your motherboard size and if it's actually going to fit in here. I have a standard ATX, so it'll fit, but other motherboards are actually they can be deluxe or extra XL, which is going to be a little bit longer. So you need to make sure and plan your case correctly to better be able to make sure your motherboard and everything's going to fit. Another thing that you get with a more expensive case that I think is nice is most of them have toolless designs where you can just makes it really easy to install in your front bays or remove them. Some of the cheaper cases you're gonna find out are actually painted a different color than the rest of the case. With a more expensive case or a little bit nicer quality, you're going to get a solid black or a solid color, which will better help with just the general look of how you like your case. And another thing to mention is for cable management, you need to see these have rubber grommets and decent cable management, a lot of tie downs in the back for routing your cables and better managing those. There's a ton of cables here, so as you can see, these are just the front panel and the hot swap bay connectors. So you need to pay attention to how you want your whole system to look and how easy it is to hide all your wires. And it also has a motherboard cutout here for a back plate. If you're installing, we're installing CPU cooler, a water cooler, so you need to make sure to pay attention to the back plate. This is better help to be able to just install the back plate after you got the motherboard installed. And that's really it with the case. Just make sure that you get one that's going to be the correct size, one that you're going to like and enjoy. Most systems are going to last for, for 4 or 5 years. I've had this case for a little while. I recently upgraded because I'm going to liquid cooling, but you really need to pay attention, because if you buy the wrong case, get everything installed, and you don't like it, then you got to remove everything and go back from there. This is an excellent case, keeps everything super cool, so this is kind of why we chose this case, and a part because I already had it to do the guide in. So when choosing your power supply, there's a couple things you need to look for. One is, the first thing that's right off the bat is it modular or non-modular? Modular basically means that you're going to have two, these are your power connectors for your motherboard that every system has to have. And for a modular, you're going to see that you can use your power options as you please. You don't have to use all of them. With the non-modular, you're going to have every single cable that this thing can hold in there. And once you see when we get under our build, that can be rather messy depending on how you like your internal of your system to look. If you can't see the inside, it's probably not going to make a difference. But most computer cases have windows or some type of display where you can see inside. And most people like that. I personally like to see the inside of my computer. And another thing to pay attention for is, let's see if I can find on here. There's usually an 80 plus. This is 80 plus silver, or I believe. Hold on one second. Yep, it's 80 plus certified, 82% high efficiency. So it's going to cost less over the time period that you use it. Some of the cheaper ones aren't going to have that feature, so it's going to cost you more power-wise. And another thing to watch is how many watts it has, depending on how much you have in your system. Most GPUs actually tell you how much minimum power you're actually going to need to run it. But if you're doing any type of overclocking, or if you have, if you load this thing up with 7 hard drives, you have to remember that you have to power all that stuff. So you need to pay attention to the watts there. My suggestion is to get maybe 700 or maybe 650 or more, depending on if you're going to run 1 card or 2 cards. As games increase in how much power they actually need and how much GPU processing is going to go into it, you may need to add another GPU card. So that's something to look at, is if you're going to keep the system for 4 or 5 years, get a nice high efficiency, get a nice power supply so you can upgrade without having to upgrade your power supply before you plug in another GPU or anything like that, or overclock your CPU. So that's why we chose this OCZ 700 watt. It's modular. It's got a 3-year warranty, which is nice, and it is 80 plus certified, which means it's going to be more high efficient. So now for the motherboard, we have it out of the box here so you can better see some of the visuals on there. But a couple things to look for in the motherboards. There is AMD and Intel motherboards, depending on what processor you're going to run. So one thing to pay attention to, the first important thing that I think of to pay attention to, is that make sure you have the right socket set, which is the LGA 1155, because they have different sockets for Intel and AMD, so make sure your motherboard is going to be compatible with your CPU. That's the most important thing. And then from there on, it just depends on what you're going to actually need in the motherboard and how many slots you're going to need. And let's take a look here. As you can see, this is a Gigabyte motherboard, and it does have the 1155 socket set, so we're good there. Another thing is that how many RAM slots. Most have 4, which is what you need. And you also need to pay attention to your little fan headers, how many fans you're actually going to run. I prefer plugging in my fan headers to the motherboard so we can control the speed so they're not running at full power all the time. And then how many expansion slots do you need? That's another thing. This one has 2, looks like for graphics cards, PCI slots. How many cards you're going to need. And another thing is how many, this has 6 SATA connections, it does have SATA 6, which is a little bit faster process. And then another thing, sorry this thing's difficult to hold up like this, is that all your connections here at the bottom, which are actually going to be for your case, your motherboard, for your front panel, and then you got your USBs, audio, different things down here at the bottom that you're going to connect. So that's one thing to keep in mind, mainly, is to make sure that it has all the connections you need for what you're running. Another thing to look for when building a system and purchasing your motherboard is this one is an ultra durable. It has 2x copper PCB, which is nice. It's not as I'm running a Sabertooth in my other system, which is a tough board, but you really want to pay attention to that. And this one actually unclocked performance, so that's why I paired it up with the CPU. It works well with K-series Intel, which is a unlocked processor. So that's one thing to really look for. That's USB 3.0. Most of them have USB 3.0. And this is SLI and Crossfire compatible, which is something else you need to take account. And let's see what else. That's basically it. This board has, it's not a $300-400 deluxe board, but it's going to be a nice board that's really going to work well with this system. And so now for the CPU, like I said before, I chose the Intel Core i5-2500K. It is the 2nd generation processor. The 3rd generation is out, but this is regarded as one of the best i5 processors out there. It's unlocked, which is what the K means. So that's a really nice feature. So you can overclock it based on how cool you can keep it. You can push it up really high. So in my previous system, which I'm actually running the same processor, I've been able to overclock it significantly with this cooler, which is why I am going to use this cooler. A lot of information out there on Intel or AMD. You can choose whichever you prefer. I prefer Intel. I've had good reliability and just overall good experience with them. But some people really like AMD. There's tons of information out there. Just do a quick Google search and some will pop up and you can read about it. So that's the processor, it's unlocked. And for our cooler, we're actually using the Corsair H70 with 2 fans. We'll use a push-pull configuration. This was running in my old system, and this is a beast for what you get. It's already pre-liquid cooled, there's no maintenance, nothing, you just buy it, install it, put it in. So this is what we're going to be running. It keeps the CPU really cool. You can use a stock one if you want, the stock Intel that comes with it, but I wouldn't suggest that. I'd probably suggest upgrading, especially if you're getting the K processor, which is unlocked, and you can overclock that fairly easily. So that's some things to look into when you get your CPU. And now that we've done that, let's jump into our GPU. Which there's tons of options on GPU. This is AMD. There's 2 main manufacturers out there, which is AMD, or actually chip design processors out there, which is AMD and NVIDIA. That's another choice. I've had both cards, AMD and NVIDIA, and there's tons of options out there. Current, older generation. I mean, there's a million options out there. That's one thing you'll have to decide on your own, is how intense you're going to actually run your GPU on games or any type of other processes. So for here, I chose XFX, is actually who uses AMD's design and then puts their own outer shell and cooling and fans and everything on the GPU. But they have a lifetime limited warranty, which is one reason why I got this. And the 7950 is a great card. This is the double dissipation card, 3 gigabytes. Another thing to look for is if it's PCI Express 3.0, and this has to be compatible with your motherboard. Your motherboard also has to have PCI Express 3.0. That's something that's just a little bit more into the future. So I don't see that being really super important right now, but some people might not need. The 7950 it's a current card. I mean, it'll run any game right now that you need. I chose it just because it just mainly, I've had FXF cards before. This will run really cool, and it has double dissipation, which is double fan, so it'll work well with the case since it's an airflow type cooling design. Won't be liquid cooling. That's why we chose that. So now for some of the miscellaneous stuff. Some of it could be really cheap or really expensive depending on how you want to set up your system. The first thing is RAM, and I've had good luck with Kingston. I've had really good luck with this RAM. There's different speeds, DDR3, this is a 1600 speed, but RAM is so cheap right now that I'd really just look for a deal and grab what seems to be most reliable. So we're going to be running 8 gigabytes of RAM. Another thing to look for is to make sure it's dual 2 cards, so it can run RAM works a little better if it's running dual cards. And then for storage, SSDs have really had prices have really dropped lately. They're almost cheaper than hard drives right now because of the flooding that's happened in some of the hard drive factories from a while ago. They're starting to stabilize and come down a little bit, but SSDs are so cheap that it's almost silly not to have one as your operating system boot drive. It really speeds up the performance and process of your system. And then you can pick up 1 or 2 hard drives as you go. So for this system, I'm going to be running this for my boot for the Windows OS. And then I don't have it sitting here with me, but I'm going to have a 500 gigabyte, just a general storage drive, a Seagate, which I'm going to be using as storage. And then Windows 7, I don't really see a difference between Home and Premium and all those. As long as it's 64-bit, which allows you to use more than 4 gigabytes of memory. That's all that matters. This is a 64 gigabit option. So that's really it. DVD, that's pretty general if you need a DVD. Blu-ray, if you're going to be watching any movies on this, or you need to store a large amount of data, or you can pick up a DVD CD drive pretty cheap. And that's basically it to go over why I chose each individual thing. There's tons of options out there. This is one of the funnest processes of the whole entire building your own PC, is actually being able to choose the components. It's a really, really cool process that I enjoy. So this is everything we got and everything we're going to be using. So this concludes part 1 of my guide on picking your actual components and looking at compatibility and what's actually going to work and what might best work for you. Hopefully this was somewhat informative and helped you out a little bit if you're looking into building your own PC. And hopefully I'll have part 2 up here soon. I'm actually, as you can see, nothing is installed, but I'm getting ready to do that now, and it takes a little time to shoot it, but I'm hoping to get that up in the next couple days. So keep a lookout for that. Subscribe, however you want to keep a lookout if you're looking for part 2. But this is going to be the first part of my how to build your own PC system, desktop, workstation, whatever you want to call it. So watch out for part 2 coming up.